What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Guys That Magic, and I am super excited today to bring you a deck tech of one of the 3 new legendary creatures exclusively from those pre-release packs. So if you weren't already aware, Wizards of the Coast is doing something kind of interesting this go around. If you do attend a local game store and attend their pre-release, you'll actually have one of 3 different legendary creatures included in the pre-release pack. Now, sadly, you can't use them for the pre-release itself, but of course, you can continue to play with the cards elsewhere. For this video, though, we are going to be talking about a deck tech regarding one of those legendary creatures. This is going to be Voja, Jaws of the Conclave. Voja is 2, a red, a green, and a white for a legendary creature wolf. It's a 5/5 with Vigilance, Trample, and Ward 3. It also says that whenever it attacks, put X+1/+1 counters on each creature you control, where X is the number of elves you control, and then you draw a card for each wolf you control. For 5 mana, you get a 5/5 beats deck that is going to make your team massive and draw you a ton of cards. Now, just looking over this, I absolutely am in love with this wolf. Of the 3 legendary creatures that are exclusive to those pre-release packs, I'm going to go ahead and be upfront and honest with you guys. I actually do like Voja the best, and do think that this is probably going to be the most powerful of the 3. However, that's not to say that the other 3 don't do their own like spicy little thing. This is just the one that really stuck out to me and got me the most excited. Also, if you're curious to check out the deck techs for the other 2, we're going to be dropping those as well. With that being said, though, we're going to go ahead and dive in with this deck tech. If you haven't already guessed, this deck tech is going to be very heavy with elves and some wolves, but just kind of full disclosure here, there's actually not a whole lot of really good wolves whenever it comes to Magic. Sadly, I don't know if it's just because like there's a wolf and dog split. I don't know if it's because, you know, there's also werewolves in this game that, well, they don't always meet the wolf stipulation. But with that being said, there are a ton of really, really good elves. So you're going to notice there's a little bit of a split here. We are going to be much more elf heavy than what we are wolf heavy. That's not a bad thing, though, because our commander is still going to draw us at least 1 card every time it swings because it counts itself as a wolf. And while there are other creatures in here that are going to count up for that wolf tally, too. With that being said, though, our first creature here is Allosaurus Shepherd. This is a single green mana for a creature elf shaman. It is a 1/1 and says it cannot be countered, and green spells you control cannot be countered. It also says that you can pay 4 and 2 green for a total of 6 mana, and until end of turn, each creature you control has base power and toughness 5/5 and becomes a dinosaur in addition to its other creature types. I love having our stuff be uncounterable here, and Allosaurus Shepherd coming in at only 1 mana makes this oh so sweet. Up next here, we have Beast Whisperer. This is 2 and 2 green for a total of 4 mana. It's a creature elf druid. It is a 2/3 and says whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. This is one of the best draw engines in green, and I love the fact that this also happens to be an elf. Ivy Lane Denizen is 3 and a green for a creature elf warrior. It is a 2/3 and says whenever another green creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. We are going to be a deck that is going to build up our creatures. We're going to be playing around with a lot of +1/+1 counters. This happens to be an elf and does the +1/+1 counter thing already really well. It fits in beautifully in this list. Masked Vandal is 1 and a green for a creature shapeshifter. It is a 1/3, and it is a changeling, stating that this card is every creature type. So this is both an elf and a wolf for the purposes of this deck. It says whenever it enters the battlefield, you may exile a creature card from your graveyard, and if you do, exile target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. Oracle of Moldiah is 3 and a green for a creature elf shaman. It is a 2/2 and says you may play an additional land on each of your turns. You play with the top card of your library revealed, and you may play lands from the top of your library. Just an extra little bonus there. It gives us an extra card advantage, as well as an additional way for us to kind of plan out our turns, considering we are going to be knowing what's going to be happening next. Up next here, we have Realm Walker. This is 2 and a green for a creature shapeshifter. This is a changeling as well, so it is both a wolf and an elf. It says whenever it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. You may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may cast creature spells of that chosen type from the top of your library. Realm Walker is a 2/3. Whenever it does enter the battlefield, you are going to name elf in this deck every single time. There is just significantly more elves that are really powerful and playable. Now, Realm Walker, obviously, with that shapeshifter ability, with the changeling, is going to count for Voja in terms of like both piles, but this card just pulls so much work. Up next here we have Reclamation Sage. This is 2 and a green for a creature elf shaman. It is a 2/1 that says whenever it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. So nice little removal piece stapled onto an elf. Up next, we have Shalai and Halar. This is 1, a red, a green, and a white. This is a legendary creature, Angel Elf. It is a 3/3 with flying and vigilance. And it says whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, Shalai and Halar deal that much damage to target opponent. Oh boy. Because your entire board is going to be getting +1/+1 counters whenever Voja attacks, Shalai and Halar may just absolutely kill one of your opponents. You're going to be putting a lot of +1/+1 counters on your creatures. Shalai and Halar is going to see that, and is just going to be able to start really damaging things. So not only is this a flying elf, but this is a creature that if your opponents do not deal with immediately, is just going to take over the game. We also have Wood Elves here. This is 2 and a green for a total of 3 mana. It is a 1/1 creature elf scout, and it says whenever it enters the battlefield, search your library for a forest card, put that card onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. Of course, we're playing around with an elf deck, and elves love mana, so this next group of creatures is going to be dedicated towards producing it. First one here is Arbor Elf, and for a single green mana, you get a creature elf druid. It is a 1/1 that you can tap to untap target forest. So essentially, that forest can tap twice over the course of a single turn, or maybe turn cycle, allowing you to get some extra mana. Bloom Tender is 1 and a green for a creature elf druid. It is a 1/1 that you can tap, and it says, for each color among permanents you control, add 1 mana of that color. So in this deck, Bloom Tender can actually tap for 3 mana. Boreal Druid is a single green mana for a 1/1 that says you can tap to add 1 mana to your mana pool. Circle of Dreams Druid is 3 green mana for a creature elf druid. It is a 2/1 that you can tap to add a green mana to your mana pool for each creature you control. This card gets out of control pretty much immediately. The second this thing is able to untap, it's going to start way overproducing for you. Elvish Mystic is a single green mana for a creature elf druid. You can tap it for a green mana, and it is a 1/1. Findhorn Elves is a single green mana for a creature elf druid. It is a 1/1 that you can tap for a green mana. And Llanowar Elves is a single green mana for a 1/1 that you can tap to add a green mana to your mana pool. Marwyn the Nurturer is also included in this grouping. She is 2 and a green for a legendary creature elf druid. She's a 1/1 and says whenever another elf enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Marwyn the Nurturer. And then, of course, you can tap her and add an amount of green mana equal to Marwyn's power. Because, once again, we are a +1/+1 counters deck, Marwyn is capable of tapping for an absolutely ludicrous amount of mana pretty much immediately. Even if you don't happen to have a whole lot else going on, maybe it's just her and, of course, our commander, her power is going to be growing very, very quickly. Moving forward, our next group of elves are going to make sure that our, well, already pretty sizable creatures are going to be getting even bigger. The first one here is Arwen, Weaver of Hope. She is 1 and 2 green for a legendary creature elf noble. She's a 2/1 and says each other creature you control enters the battlefield with a number of additional +1/+1 counters on it equal to Arwen, Weaver of Hope's toughness. I'm going to say this a lot, but this creature does also get out of control really quickly with our commander. If our commander gets to go to combat, Arwen the Nurturer is just going to grow really big. And past that point, it means any other creature that we cast, it's going to enter the battlefield with a huge number of +1/+1 counters on it. Bloodline Pretender is 3 mana for an artifact creature, Shapeshifter. It is a 2/2 with Changeling, and it says, as it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Whenever another creature of the chosen type enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Bloodline Pretender. So this card is going to be gigantic, and then help us out whenever that double dipping comes into play for the Changeling factor. Gwenin Guiltleaf Dane is 2 and 2 green for a total of 4 mana. It is a legendary creature elf warrior. It's a 3/4 with reach and says other elves you control get +1/+1. It also says whenever it attacks, you gain 1 life for each attacking elf you control. Elvish Archdruid is 1 and 2 green for a creature elf druid. It is a 2/2, and it says other elf creatures you control get +1/+1. It also, however, states that you can tap it to add a green mana for each elf you control. So this one not only pumping up our team, but also doing that mana production thing as well. Elvish Champion is 1 and 2 green for a total of 3 mana. It is a creature lord. Don't forget, though, this thing is also an elf. It's a 2/2, and it says all elves get +1/+1 and have Forest Walk. Elvish Clan Caller is 2 green mana for a creature elf druid. It is a 1/1 and says other elves you control get +1/+1. There's also an additional ability that you can pay 6 mana, tap it, and search your library for another card called Elvish Clan Caller. You would put that card onto the battlefield and shuffle your library. Do keep in mind, you will fail to find. You can only have 1 copy of this in your deck in a game of EDH. But I guess in the case you are desperate to search your library, or maybe you already know what the top card is and you just don't want it, you can sink 6 mana into this for an incredibly expensive shuffle. Galadrim Brigade is 2 and a green for a total of 3 mana. It is a creature elf soldier. It's a 2/2, and it has an ability of Squad of 1 and a green. Squad, for those of you who do not remember, states that as an additional cast a cost spell, you may pay 1 and a green any number of times. When this creature enters the battlefield, you'll create that many tokens that are copies of it, and it says other elves you control get +1/+1. This card is fantastic, especially considering that we are going to have an absolute ridiculous amount of mana for us to sink into this. It's not really going to be all that uncommon for you to have like 10 or more mana for you to be able to, well, squad or multi-squad or multi-kick or whatever we want to call that. Immaculate Magistrate is 3 and a green for a total of 4 mana. It is a creature elf shaman. It's a 2/2 that you can tap and put a +1/+1 counter on target creature for each elf you control. So you're only going to be making one thing big, but you're going to be making it very, very large. Imperious Perfect is up next. This is 2 and a green for a total of 3 mana. It is a creature elf warrior. It's a 2/2, and it says other elves you control get +1/+1. It also has an ability in which you may pay a green, tap it, and create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token. Jiraga Warcaller is a single green mana for a creature elf warrior. It is a 1/1 with a multi-kicker of 1 and a green. It says you may pay an additional 1 and a green any number of times as you cast this spell. It also says that it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each time that it was killed. And each other elf you control gets +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on Jiraga Warcaller. You don't actually need to kick this for this to be effective because we can put +1/+1 counters on this creature later on. Leaf Crown Visionary is 2 green mana for a creature elf druid. It is a 1/1 and says other elves you control get +1/+1. It also says whenever you cast an elf spell, you may pay a green mana, and if you do, draw a card. Priest of Titania is 1 and a green for a creature elf druid. It is a 1/1 that you can tap to add a green mana to your mana pool for each elf on the battlefield. Another just giant mana production source here. Sylvala, Heart of the Wilds, is 1 and 2 green for a legendary creature elf scout. She is a 2/3 and says whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller may draw a card if its power is greater than each other creature's power. You can also pay a green, tap it, and add X mana in any combination of colors to your mana pool, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Don't worry about that first ability. Chances are your creature is going to start off relatively small, but they are going to get very large. I don't anticipate many of your opponents actually being able to take advantage of that ability to draw cards, and Sylvala is just going to produce massive amounts of mana for you. The last creature I have in this package is Wirewood Channeler. This is 3 and a green for a creature elf. It is a 2/2 that you can tap to add X mana of any one color to your mana pool, where X is the number of elves in play. This deck is very, very, very good at making large quantities of mana. The last elf that I do want to talk about, sadly, this doesn't tap for mana, and it actually doesn't make our other elves grow, but it is still really important to this list and provides a different function altogether. This is Elvish Warmaster. For 1 and a green, you get a creature elf warrior. It is a 2/2 and says whenever 1 or more other elves enter the battlefield under your control, you create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token. It says that this ability triggers only once each turn. It also has an ability in which you may pay 5 and 2 green for a total of 7 mana. And it says elves you control get +2/+2 and gain Death Touch until end of turn. I love the token production there. Elvish Warmaster is a great card for you to be able to get into play early on and then just capitalize on those additional elf tokens that you'll be producing. Now, I know that people were really expecting a lot from this package. I did try to warn you at the very beginning, but we're going to move on to our wolves. And we're going to start off with Pyreheat Wolf. This is 2 and a red for a creature wolf. It is a 1/1 and says whenever Pyreheat Wolf attacks, Each creature you control can't be blocked this turn except by 2 or more creatures, so it kind of gives your team menace. This creature also happens to have Undying, stating that whenever this creature dies, if it had no +1/+1 counters on it, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Now, sadly, with this deck, we're very good at being able to distribute those +1/+1 counters, so Pyreheart Wolf probably not going to get that Undying clause, but still definitely a great card and allows us to push in for some damage. And that just about wraps it up for the wolf package. Now we're going to move on to some of the other utility creatures. Doesn't fit in necessarily as being a wolf or an elf, but are very important in this list. The first one here is going to be Craterhoof Behemoth. This is 5 and 3 green for a total of 8 mana. It is a creature beast. It is a 5/5 with haste, and it says whenever it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. Craterhoof Behemoth, whenever you play it, should end the game. Kutzul Malamute Exemplar is 1 a green and a white for a legendary creature cat warrior. It's a 3/3 and says your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. It also says whenever 1 or more creatures you control with power greater than its base power deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. I love that ability because all of our creatures are going to be bigger than what they started with, so long as our commander is able to swing. Toski, Bearer of Secrets, is 3 and a green for a legendary creature squirrel. It is a 1/1 that cannot be countered. It has Indestructible. It must attack each turn if able. And then it also says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. We are very aggressive. We are a creature-based aggro deck. Toski is going to draw us so many cards. And then we also have Soul of the Harvest. This is 4 and 2 green for a creature elemental. It's a 6/6 with trample and says, whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. So all of these just kind of providing that extra either card advantage or just in the game factor. Moving on, we're going to go to some of the instants and sorceries. This first group, they are all sorceries. We're going to make sure that we just get our lands, make sure that we have enough mana to cast our things in the case, I don't know, our elf deck isn't producing mana for whatever reason. The first card here is going to be Explore. This is 1 and a green for a sorcery. It says you may play an additional land this turn and draw a card. Up next, we have Farseek. This is 1 and a green for a sorcery that says search your library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain card. Put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Rampant Growth is 1 and a green for a sorcery, stating that you may search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. And 3 Visits is 1 and a green for a sorcery that says search your library for a forest card, put it on the battlefield, and then shuffle. Our next group of instants and sorcery spells, these are going to be high impact playmakers. The first one here is Jeska's Will. This is 2 and a red for a total of 3 mana. It is a sorcery that says choose one. If you control your commander as you cast a spell, you may choose both. You add a red mana for each card in target opponent's hand, and you exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. Jeska's Will is really good at just being able to ramp up. In the case that we needed maybe extra red mana for something, we can provide that with this card. This also does give us an extra card advantage with those with the cards that we're going to exile over. The next card here is Rishkar's Expertise. This is 4 and 2 green for a sorcery. It says, draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. Our creatures should be pretty big, so Rishkar's Expertise should hopefully draw us, on average, I would say between about 5 and 10 cards. And then it says you may cast a spell with mana value of 5 or less from your hand without paying for its mana cost, so just extra value on top of that. Shamanic Revelation is 3 and 2 green for a total of 5 mana. It is a sorcery that says draw a card for each creature you control. This also has Ferocious, which we should always be triggering. And it says that you gain 4 life for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. That should be the vast majority of our board. And if our creatures don't meet that clause yet, just swing with Voja, and then they should meet that clause. So Shamanic Revelation, draw cards, gain life, protect yourself from death, and set yourself up just to win the game the following turn with all that card advantage. We also have Return of the Wild Speaker here. This is 4 and a green for a total of 5 mana. It is an instant that says choose one. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control, or non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. This will help us to push in and just kind of make sure that we solidify a win with that extra damage bump, or we can draw a ton of cards and probably just solidify the fact that we're going to win based off of all of the new goodies that we just drew. The next 2 cards I'm going to talk about here are instants or sorceries that are just going to make sure that we win the game. It's going to help us to be able to push our damage through. The first one here is Overwhelming Stampede. This is 3 and 2 green for a total of 5 mana. It's a sorcery that says, until end of turn, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X, where X is the greatest power amongst creatures you control. If we have anything that is even somewhat sizable, Overwhelming Stampede should just help us to win the game. And the fact that it gives our creatures trample means that we can just full swing. We don't have to worry about our opponents. They're probably not surviving. And then, of course, we also have Akroma's Will. This is 3 and a white for an instant that says choose one, but if you control your commander as you cast a spell, you may choose both. It says the creatures you control gain flying, vigilance, and double strike until end of turn, and or creatures you control gain lifelink, indestructible, and protection from all colors until end of turn. Either one of these cards should just win you the game if you're able to cast them. This next group of cards, these are all going to be designed to help make sure that our commander sticks around, that our board state sticks around in the case for whatever reason our opponents can pay the 3 ward cost on our commander. Well, we got some backup here to just make sure that it didn't work. The first one here is Deflecting Swap. This is 2 and a red for an instant that says if you control your commander, you may cast a spell without paying for its mana cost. You may choose new targets for the target spell or ability. So just redirect that kill spell. Maybe turn it against one of their creatures instead. Flawless Maneuver is 2 and a white for an instant that says if you control your commander, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost. It also says the creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. This will save you from a board wipe, or this will save you from spot removal if you need it. Heroic Intervention is 1 and a green for an instant that says permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Same thing here that I mentioned about Flawless Maneuver. It's going to be basically providing that same functionality, but this one you do have to pay the 2 for. And then the last card here is Veil of Summer. This is a single green mana for an instant that says draw a card if an opponent has cast either a blue or a black spell this turn, and you and permanents you control gain hexproof from both blue and black until end of turn. A little bit more restrictive here, however, Veil of Summer should hopefully allow us to be able to dodge most of our opponent's spot removal, assuming that they're playing either in blue or black. As far as our own removal package goes, the main source of removal for this deck is actually just going to be our creatures stampeding over our opponent's creatures and forcing them to just block and have their little things die. However, we do have a couple of cards in here in the case that that plan doesn't work. The first of which is Beast Within. This is 2 and a green for an instant. It says destroy target permanent. Its controller puts a 3/3 green beast creature token onto the battlefield. Generous Gift is 2 and a white for an instant that says destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 elephant creature token. Path to Exile is single white mana for an instant that says exile target creature. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. And Swords to Plowshares is a single white mana for an instant that says exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. All of these are going to make sure that our opponent can't really get around the amount of damage that we're going to be swinging in at them, or maybe they have, I don't know, like an indestructible creature or something like that. We don't have much of an artifact ramp package in this deck. For the most part, we don't really need one. Our deck already does such a really, really good job of just making sure that we have tons of mana with all of our elves. But with that being said, we do still have some. So we're going to start off with Mind Stone, which is 2 mana for an artifact. You can tap it for a colorless, or you can pay 1, tap it, sacrifice it, and draw a card. Soul Ring is a single mana for an artifact that you can tap to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. Talisman of Impulse is 2 mana for an artifact that can tap for a colorless, or you can have it tap for either a red or a green, but if you do, it'll deal 1 damage to you. And Talisman of Unity is 2 mana for an artifact that you can tap for a colorless, or you can tap it for either a green or a white, and it will deal 1 damage to you. The last card included in this package is Thought Vessel. This is 2 mana for an artifact that says you have no maximum hand size, and you can tap it for 1 colorless mana. Thought Vessel, probably the most important out of all of these cards. If we are able to really start drawing a decent grip of cards, Thought Vessel can be very important for us to make sure that we're not just discarding massive amounts. Speaking about drawing absolutely insane amounts of cards in this deck. Now, whenever we attack, we're going to draw cards with Voja based on the number of wolves we control. Sadly, there's not a whole lot of wolves in this deck, but there is a way to make sure that we have lots of, well, I'm using air quotes here, but wolves in play. And that's going to be with Maskwood Nexus, our next artifact. This is 4 mana for an artifact that says creatures you control are every creature type. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that are not on the battlefield. You can also pay 3 mana to tap this card and create a 2/2 blue shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. This means all of our elves are now wolves. And all of our wolves, I guess, would also be elves, but there's not many of those. That means that not only are we going to be getting all of those +1/+1 counters, but now whenever Voja attacks, we are also going to be drawing huge amounts of cards. Not really a whole lot of enchantments in this list. There's actually only 3, but we're going to go ahead and go through them. The first of which is Guardian Project. This is 3 and a green for an enchantment that says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control, or a creature card in your graveyard, draw a card. This basically just means whenever you cast a creature spell, so long as it ETBs, you're going to be able to draw a card. Rhythm of the Wild is 1, a red, and a green for an enchantment that says creature spells you control cannot be countered, and non-token creatures you control have Riot. That means that they either come in with a +1/+1 counter, or you can choose to give it haste until end of turn, which means if you're using this on, for example, your commander, you can cast Voja, give Voja haste, and then swing to immediately just put +1/+1 counters on it and draw cards anyways. The last enchantment here is Shared Animosity. This is 2 and a red for an enchantment that says whenever a creature you control attacks, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each other attacking creature that shares a creature type with it. We are very, very elf heavy, which does help out with Shared Animosity. And because of that, that means that our little elves are going to be swinging in for much, much more. Moving forward, we're going to go ahead and dive in with our mana base. The first card here is Command Tower. We can tap it for 1 mana of any color under commander's color identity. We also have Exotic Orchard that we can tap to add 1 mana of any color that a land that opponent controls could produce. The most important color for this deck, obviously, is green. However, because we are so heavily skewed with green in this deck, we actually might need Exotic Orchard to just kind of pull a little bit of weight and make sure that we have access to white or red oftentimes. Jetmir's Garden is a land that is a mountain, forest, and plains. You can tap it for either a red, a green, or a white. It always enters the battlefield tapped, though, and it does have an ability where you can cycle it for 3, meaning that you can pay 3 mana, discard the card, and draw a card if you happen to draw this maybe late in the game. And then lastly, as far as our 3-color package goes, we do have Jungle Shrine. This does enter the battlefield tapped 100% of the time, but you can tap it for either a red, a green, or a white. I'm not the biggest fan of these slow triomes. I'm not actually the biggest fan of just triomes in general, as they do enter the battlefield tapped, but it is really, really, really critically important that we have lands that can tap not just for green, but for the other colors as well. So Jungle Shrine going to be included here. Moving forward, we've got plenty of just 2-color lands that we're going to talk about. The first group of them are going to be the Pain lands. So this is Battlefield Forge, Brushland, and Carplusian Forest. We're going to be throwing all 3 of these into this list. The way that these lands work, you can tap them to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, or you can tap them to add 1 of 2 different colors to your mana pool, but they will deal 1 damage to you. So Carplusian Forest, you can tap for either a red or a green. Brushland, either a green or a white. And Battlefield Forge, either a red or a white. These are still really powerful lands. I love the fact that you can tap them for colors. I also love the fact that whenever you no longer necessarily need that color of mana, you can just tap them for colorless later on, and they're not going to hurt you. We have the bond lands here. These are Bountiful Promenade, Spectator Seating, and Spire Garden. All 3 of these basically to be doing the exact same thing. They say that they enter the battlefield tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents, and then they can tap for 1 of 2 different colors of mana. So Spire Garden can tap for either a red or a green, Spectator Seating either a red or a white, and Bountiful Promenade either a white or a green. Up next, we do have all 3 of the slow lands for this color combination, that being Overgrown Farmland, Rockfall Vale, and Sundown Pass. The way that these cards work is that they always enter the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. So just make sure that this isn't your turn 1 or turn 2 drop, and you're good to go for the rest of the game. They later on can tap for 1 of 2 different colors of mana. So Sundown Pass can tap for either a red or a white. Rockfall Vale can tap for either a red or a green, and Overgrown Farmland either a green or a white. I actually do really love these lands just because for the most part, if you do happen to have one in your opening hand, just kind of play around it a little bit, and you should hopefully be fine with this and not have this enter the battlefield tapped. And then we also have 2 check lands here. I'm not actually putting in the whole cycle, so we're going to be putting in Rootbound Crag and Sunpetal Grove. The way that these lands work is that they care about a specific land type. They both say that they enter the battlefield tapped unless you control one of the 2 basic land types that they care about. Sunpetal Grove cares about a forest or a plains, and Rootbound Crag cares about either a mountain or a forest. And then they can tap for 1 of 2 different colors of mana. I'm also going to be throwing in 2 of these shock lands, the first of which is Stomping Ground. This is land that is both a mountain and a forest. You can tap it for a red or a green, and it says, as it enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 life, and if you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. I am also including Temple Garden, which is both the forest and plains. It can tap for a green or a white, and then has that same enter the battlefield tapped clause. Now, the reason why I am not including the red-white shockland in the red-white checkland is because we don't actually have a whole lot of plains or mountains in this list. And for the most part, I just felt like if we were to include them, they'd be a little bit clunkier. I want us to be able to have access to our mana the turn that we play these lands. So sadly, those 2 other lands just a little bit too slow there. We do have 2 other lands in this list that are going to be here just for like utilities purposes. They actually don't tap for a color, but I did think that they were really important. The first of which is Mutavault. This is a land that you can tap it to add 1 mana to your mana pool, or you can pay 1 and Mutavault becomes a 2/2 creature with all creature types until end of turn. It's still a land. It's a nice little way for us to be able to get an extra utility creature in play. It's kind of also difficult for our opponents to deal with because Mutavault is a land a lot of the times. But we can put +1/+1 counters on it. We can draw cards off of it because of Voja, so Mutavault, pretty powerful in this list. And then we also have Reliquary Tower. It's a land that says we have no maximum hand size. We can tap to add a colorless. We do have some pretty impactful draw spells in this list, and if Voja is able to really kick off, maybe with like a Masquerade Nexus, Reliquary Tower is going to be your best friend. Moving forward, we're going to talk about our basic lands. We have 10 basic forests in this list, 3 basic mountains, and 3 basic plains. We are very much so a green heavy list. If you are interested in picking up this list, it is $348, at least at the time of this recording on TCG Player. If you're curious about how you can build this deck for a little bit on the cheaper end, there are some very expensive cards that I included in this list. Things like Craterhoof Behemoth, Deflecting Swat, Flawless Maneuver, and Jessica's Will are a couple cards just off the top of my head that you could potentially take out. And I think that might actually drop at about, I don't know, a full $100 or so. Voja is incredibly powerful, just kind of right out of the get-go. I do think that this is a commander that you're probably going to regularly see at your LGS, so just keep an eye out for it. This thing grows very quickly, and that Ward 3 is a high enough tax where they're probably going to actually have to think about how they use removal here. If you did like this video, please make sure that you like and subscribe to this channel. And then also, as always, we live off of all of your support. Please make a comment down below. What would you have done differently with Voja? Are you excited for this commander? Maybe one of the other commanders that are the pre-release exclusives. Maybe there's another legendary creature from this set that you'd like us to do a deck tech on. So do me a favor, make a comment of that one down below as well. If you want to, we are also on other social media platforms. So check us out on Instagram, on Twitter, and also on TikTok. And if you'd love to show us even more love, we have recently kicked off a Patreon. If you want to, you can go ahead and find the link for that down below. And thank you so much for checking out this YouTube video. I mean, we make this content for our fans. We'd love to hear back from all of you. So a big, huge thank you from all of us here at Guys at Magic. And until next time, peace.